Hello, welcome to this afternoon's program, Teens and Social Media. This is a recorded presentation, part of our Mental Health Club virtual library collection. Founded in November of 2014, No Shame on You is a nonprofit organization dedicated to eliminating the stigma associated with mental health conditions and raising awareness in the community. No Shame on You's goal is for the people who need help to seek it, for family members and friends to know how to provide proper support and to save lives. No Shame on You achieves its mission through community outreach programs, educational presentations, workshops, daily online tools, resources, blog, podcasts, and teen ambassador programs. I would like to introduce the fabulous Maddy Boesche. Maddy is a first-year student earning her master's at University of Chicago, Crown Family School of Social Work, Policy, Practice in the Clinical Social Work track. Her undergraduate background in history from Vassar College laid a foundation for understanding the way that people are powerfully influenced by their environment. Maddy spent several years working for the Chicago Mercantile Exchange, and although the financial technology sector was an unfamiliar opportunity, she pursued mission-aligned projects and nonprofit collaboration, introducing first-generation college students in an internship recruitment program. And Maddy is also No Shame on You's intern and is fantastic. Maddy, take it away.
Thanks, Wendy. Welcome, everyone. Today, as Wendy said, we're going to talk about social media and teen mental health. And I think this is a topic that everybody's kind of thinking about, comes up all the time, but we don't necessarily talk about the way that it specifically affects mental health, other than kind of saying, I don't know that it's great, or maybe it's not bothering me so much. So I thought today we could kind of go into the specifics of how it affects the teen brain, what kind of repercussions that has for teen mental health, and then thinking about ways that we can manage social media use in a way that's just healthy for you. So a little about me. I know Wendy shared some about me, but my name is Maddy. I'm a graduate student studying social work. I've been an intern at No Shame on You this year, and I'm also a Taurus, if that gives you a little info about who I am. So teen social media use. Some of this stuff is probably going to be pretty familiar to you. Probably the top 4 social media sites that teenagers and young people use tend to be YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, and Snapchat. There's been a lot of research on how much teens are using social media. Typically, younger kids are using social media for entertainment. So that's why a lot of them tend to just use YouTube. But then as kids get older and social interactions become more important, they tend to use social media to connect with others. In 2021 alone, TikTok had 37.3 million users just in Gen Z. So as you can see, it's a pretty large number of the people who are using these social media platforms. And a lot of those companies know that and rely on teens. There was also a study in 2018, which found that 97% of teenagers were using social media, and that 45% of them said that they were online almost constantly. Again, probably not a surprise to you. Having a phone in school, people are online a lot. Those studies were from 2015 to 2019. So it's interesting to think that those numbers have probably changed a bit. And obviously during the pandemic, teens were using social media a lot to connect with their friends and their peers. So I wanted to start talking a little bit about social media and the brain. So part of why social media is so addictive has to do with the brain's reward pathway. I'm not going to get too far into the brain science, but here's the key information we need to know. Everybody's brain has a reward pathway. It's basically the brain's way of learning from experiences what things feel good and that we want more of. So this is really helpful and probably helped people evolve, because when they would find something that tasted good, or they found a source of water, or they were around other human beings who made them feel safe or connected to others, it would feel good. So the brain's reward pathway basically teaches you, when you have those good feelings, to go back and seek those experiences again and again. This is something that happens all the time for us, whether it's like delicious food, sugar. This can happen with people using like alcohol or drugs. It can happen with gambling. And it can also happen in more innocuous ways, like somebody you just really like spending time with. The problem with social media is that it has really integrated itself into our lives. So more so than ever before, we're having these loops occur in our brain where we're getting a really positive experience that reinforces a behavior. When you have your notifications turned on, you're getting social media, little bursts of dopamine in your system that feel good. And so your brain is getting more and more accustomed to having those good feelings and seeking them out again. I'm just going to show a quick diagram. Basically what happens is, your phone buzzes, you check it, you notice that you got a like or somebody commented on something you posted, or you got a message from someone, and that feels good. And you get a rush of those positive chemicals in your brain. So the next time your phone buzzes, you're going to check because you anticipate feeling that way. And this can be a really powerful way to change people's behavior. There's also something called intermittent reinforcement, where maybe you don't get a notification every time you check your phone, but the times that you do, you feel good. So then you keep checking your phone over and over and over, hoping that maybe one of those times you're going to have that experience. And this is what happens with social media. People become much more fixated on using their phone, looking for those little bursts of dopamine in their brain that are going to feel good. But teens' brains are growing and developing. And so social media has impacts on teens' brains that are a little bit different than older adults. So during adolescence, your brain is growing, changing. And what ends up happening is the reward pathway that we were talking about, it tends to develop much earlier in teens' brains than the other parts of your brain that have to do with like logical decision making, which is often called executive functions. So that can include like looking at a situation and judging the pros and cons, thinking about risks, things that might seem really fun, but then thinking about the possible repercussions, generally making decisions, and then also impulse control. All of those kind of functions in your brain, that stuff is particularly developing during adolescence. So those reward pathways tend to just be experienced by teens as much more powerful than the other parts of your brains that are more about like logical decision making. That's not because teens are lazy or because they're not smart. It's just because those parts of your brains are growing at different rates. So you're experiencing those rushes of excitement having to do with social interactions, connecting with other people, excitement, novelty, in a way that's just really different than adults. And so there's really unique ways that social media ends up affecting teens. And I think that this is important to know because it's something that everybody's going through, and just something to keep in mind that doesn't really have to do with you or your self-control or any kind of attributes about you as a person, but it's just kind of a natural part of growing. So we're going to move on a little bit to the actual mental health impacts that social media can have. I would say the main takeaway here is that if somebody has existing issues that they're struggling with, whether it's depression, anxiety, low self-esteem, body image issues, and eating disorder, social media can make those things worse. So it's not necessarily that social media always is causing these things in everyone, but what the data is showing us is that when teens tend to have some kind of issues with these things, it just gets worse. Social media reinforces it. Some of that has to do with the fact that, and you probably know about this, but algorithms from some of these social media platforms, they reinforce stuff that you've already been looking at. So if you look up a video about weight loss, they're going to start promoting those videos to you very heavily. There's a lot of research that TikTok does this. Similarly, if you are, looking at accounts that have to do with influencers, they're going to suggest more influencers. There's some other impacts that social media has been measured to have. People who are checking their social media accounts at night often have a lot of sleep disruption. And this is so common that a lot of teens don't really think about it, but teens need more sleep than adults do. And so this can actually have a really negative effect. There's a lot of information about kind of these social interactions that we have online. And so, feeling worried about friendship, loneliness, jealousy, comparing yourself to peers. Those are things that everybody deals with, especially teenagers. And that's unfortunately kind of part of life. But social media means that you are getting those messages and those comparisons pretty much constantly. So it can exacerbate those negative feelings that those regular life experiences might create and cause. And there also is some kind of early studies saying that social media can impact people's attention spans just because they're constantly getting this kind of novelty and excitement from continually seeing videos and photos in a way that when you sit down to do homework, you're not experiencing. This isn't to say that social media is completely bad. I know we've been focusing on a lot of the negatives, but this is just kind of kind of helping you understand that there really are starting to be some more measured impacts on people's mental health. I'm going to touch on this really briefly. There's been a lot of information coming out over the past few years about how social media companies actually know how harmful that some of these platforms can be, especially for teens. They make a lot of money off how much time you spend on their websites. So there's always an incentive to get people drawn in and using their services, which is why they kind of design them to be very addictive. There's been information recently about Facebook, who owns Instagram, actually doing a lot of internal research and knowing that it's harmful for teens, specifically for teen girls in their body image, and that Instagram specifically tends to create much more self-comparison when it comes to physical appearance than any of the other platforms out there. Another thing to note is that, the platforms that teens are using are changing, and Facebook is concerned about losing younger users. So they've been actively recruiting even little kids to get to the platform. So I thought it would be helpful for us to kind of think about, what teens are saying. It's really easy to hear adults kind of wag their finger at teenagers and say, you're not doing this correctly, or you should stop, or, I've told you what to do and you're not listening. But I think teens actually know a lot about what's going on when it comes to social media use. At No Shame on You, we interact with teens a lot. And so this is some of the feedback that we've gotten. And some of the challenges that teens are facing is that when they don't use social media, they're missing out on like plans that their friends are making or events that other people are participating in just because they're not having those conversations. Heard this repeatedly, that seeing something you missed out on or that you weren't invited to, seeing photos or videos of that online can actually feel much worse than just hearing about it from someone. Another thing is, and I hear this from adults, I hear this from teens, knowing that the content you're seeing online isn't necessarily realistic doesn't always make you feel better. Even if you know that the influencers you follow are photoshopped, airbrushed, have plastic surgery, have way more money than a normal person would, it's still likely that you're probably going to compare yourself to them. That being said, there are a lot of benefits to social media. And I think it's important to talk about those because if there weren't, people wouldn't be using them. So like I mentioned before, it seems like it's a really common way that teens are connecting with their friends. And that's important. Having those social connections, having that connection to friends is actually one of the most important things as a teenager in the way that you're developing and changing. So it's really significant that this is a way that people connect with others. There's also a lot of research that says that teens who are struggling with their identity issues, low self-esteem, other things that are challenging, that they might not feel comfortable talking to like a family member or a friend about in person. Sometimes it's easier to connect with other people about that online. And that, is really valid for some people. That can actually make them, feel like they have a really strong community. That's something that's been reported in many different settings, is how much social media can create a sense of community and connection to people. So some of the solutions that we heard from teens were actually really helpful. So going off of social media completely, for most people isn't really a realistic solution, but there are some things that, different teams have suggested can be really helpful. One of those is just deleting the apps temporarily. We heard people talk about when they're feeling like they've just been on an app a lot, they're having a hard time controlling their usage, just deleting it off their phone. And, it just keeps you off the app for a few days while you kind of reset. Another thing we heard from teens was that just not adding yourself to additional social media platforms. So just sticking with the ones that you already have as a way to kind of minimize the amount of additional time you're adding to using social media. Another approach is unfollowing accounts that make you feel bad. I think this is one of those things that often takes a lot of self-reflection, because on the surface, you might think, oh, well, when I look at this account, I don't like feel obviously worse, but sometimes those impacts can take some time. You know, you get off social media and you're feeling kind of icky, but you don't know why. I just recommend kind of being mindful and aware of what you've been looking at and trying to see if there are any connections there. It's really easy to unfollow accounts. If you decide to refollow those people, it doesn't take a lot of work, but this is something that a lot of people have had success with in kind of increasing the positive experiences they have on social media while avoiding some of the negative ones. So here's some of the takeaways that we talked about: that social media hijacks your brain's reward pathway. Things that your brain already does are getting tapped into by social media. That reward pathway tends to be a lot more powerful in teens as your brain is developing. And so social media ends up having a much more powerful hold on teenagers just because of where they are developmentally. People who are already struggling with different mental health issues or emotional issues, often social media can make those things worse for them. And it can also reinforce unhealthy patterns that they may be struggling with. We also know that social media companies are making a lot of money off how much we use them. And so they have an incentive to get us to use it as much as possible. And the last thing is really just thinking about ways that you might use social media in a healthier way for you. A lot of that comes down to really reflecting on the positive things you're getting from social media, thinking about the platforms that are positive for you or fun, or that you feel like help you connect with people, and which ones aren't really. Taking time periodically to reflect on that and thinking about ways that you can, take care of yourself and minimize some of those negative impacts you have can go a long way. And they're kind of you're the only person who can really decide that for yourself. So ultimately, kind of figuring out what's best for you is, I think, the healthiest step for managing your mental health and social media. If you're looking for some more positive accounts to follow on social media that talk a little bit about mental health stigma, and ways to take care of the people in your lives, you can follow No Shame on You on Instagram or Facebook. And if you have any other questions about different mental health topics, you can reach out to us at NSOU@noshameonyou.org. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Maddy. And now I'm going to share my screen to share with you guys some additional discussion questions that come after all of our library videos for mental health clubs. So take some time and discuss within your groups. And thank you for watching this video. Have a great day, and we'll see you next time.